My name is Michael. I am 42 years old, and I grew up with my brothers on a farm in the rural town of Salem's Lot, Maine. What I am about to tell you happened when I was 14 years old. From a young age, our parents taught us to be independent, to work the land, and to take care of the livestock. Our lives revolved around animals and farming. It was a wonderful life. We would wake up very early to milk the cows and enjoyed running through the fields and bathing in the nearby river. Our farm produced almost everything we consumed, and we only bought the essentials from the nearest town. My brothers and I were very close, especially John, who was 16 years old at the time. Although we were only 2 years apart, I always looked up to him as a role model. John was the natural leader among us, taking the initiative in the most difficult tasks and always showing the bravery I aspired to emulate. Although we sometimes argued, I knew I could count on him in any situation. My relationship with my other brothers was also good, but John and I shared a special bond due to our closeness in age and the numerous adventures we embarked on together. Our father was a severe and strict man, whose word was law on the farm. He did not tolerate disobedience or lack of responsibility. His expectations were clear and firm. Work hard and fulfill our responsibilities without excuses. I remember how his stern gaze and authoritative tone always kept us alert. Although his love for us was undeniable, he demonstrated it through discipline and hard work. This approach taught us to be resilient and responsible, though it also instilled a constant fear of disappointing him. Despite his severity, Dad also had moments of tenderness, especially when he sat with us at night to tell stories. He would talk about our grandparents' times, the challenges of farm life, and the mysteries that surrounded the farm. His tales were fascinating and occasionally chilling, filled with spirits and forest creatures. These stories kept us captivated and contributed to the atmosphere of respect and fear of the unknown that prevailed in our family. That particular night, those stories were about to become a reality in a way we could never have imagined. My brothers and I were an inseparable team. John, my older brother, was always the leader, and I followed him in all our adventures. Together, we explored every corner of the farm and took on the hardest tasks. Although John and I occasionally argued, we always resolved our differences quickly. The closeness in age allowed us to share secrets and dreams, and that connection strengthened with each passing day. Our relationship with our other brothers was also good, but different. They were younger and often stayed with Mom while John and I helped Dad on the farm. We felt responsible for taking care of them and ensuring their safety. Deep down, we knew that our bond as brothers was what kept us united and strong, especially under Dad's strict supervision. John always showed the bravery I aspired to have. He often took the lead in the most challenging tasks and never showed fear, at least not openly. I tried to emulate his courage, though sometimes I found myself doubting my own bravery. Despite this, I knew I could count on John in any situation, which gave me a sense of security. The nights on the farm were a special time for us. After a long day of hard work, we would sit around the fire and listen to Dad tell stories about our grandparents and local legends. These stories were filled with spirits and creatures that roamed the forests, keeping us on the edge of our seats. Although we pretended not to be scared, those stories stayed with us, feeding our dreams and nightmares. Our father, Mr. Thompson, was a man of few words, but a commanding presence. His mere look could stop us in our tracks. He did not tolerate disobedience or laziness, and he expected absolute commitment to the farm tasks. I remember how, every morning, he would wake us up before dawn with his firm voice. "Up, boys, there's work to be done," he would say, and we would get up immediately, knowing any delay would be met with his disapproval. Dad was not a cruel man, but he was very strict. He had grown up on the same farm, under the same discipline he now imposed on us. He always told us that hard work was the only way to secure a future, and that we could only maintain the family's legacy through effort and dedication. Although we understood his reasons, It was sometimes hard not to feel fear. His punishments were fair but severe, and we always made sure to fulfill our responsibilities to avoid his anger. Despite his harshness, there were moments when we saw a softer side of our father. After a long day of work, he would sit with us at night and tell us stories about his youth and how he and his brothers faced the same challenges we did. He talked about his own fears and how he had overcome them. These moments were valuable to us as they allowed us to see that behind his rigid exterior was a man who only wanted the best for his family. Dad also shared with us ghost stories he'd heard from his own parents. He told us tales of spirits roaming the hills, apparitions by the river, and creatures lurking in the darkness. Although we told ourselves they were just stories, we could not help but keep them in mind, especially when facing the night in the countryside. Dad's severity and stories kept us alert and taught us to respect forces we could not understand. Nights around the fire were the perfect setting for our grandparents' stories. My grandmother, Mrs. Thompson, had a soft but authoritative voice. She would narrate tales of a time when people both respected and feared the spirits of the forest. There are things in this world we can't see, but they are there, watching us, she would say, and we would listen with wide eyes, both scared and fascinated. One of the tales that impacted us the most was The Lady of the River. The story recounts the appearance of a white-clad woman by the river on full moon nights. The villagers believed that her spirit, trapped between this world and the next, was searching for her lost child. My grandmother warned us never to go near the river after dark, and though we nervously laughed it off, none of us dared disobey that rule. My grandfather, Mr. Smith, also had his own stories. He spoke of the forest creatures, half man and half beast, who hunted in the darkness. One of those beings was the chupacabra, a creature said to attack livestock and drain their blood. Although we knew these were just legends, every time we found one of our animals dead for unknown reasons, we couldn't help but remember my grandfather's words and feel a chill down our spines. Besides the ghost stories, our grandparents also told us tales of bravery and survival. They spoke of how they had faced hard times, of the droughts that almost ruined the farm, and how, by working together, they had overcome every obstacle. These stories inspired us and gave us strength, reminding us that we came from a line of strong and resilient people. Although fear was present in many of their tales, so were hope and determination. One of our most important tasks was fetching water from the river that flowed at the mountain's foot. The journey was about 30 minutes on foot, and we did it every 2 or 3 days. I clearly remember the day that changed our lives forever. John, my older brother, and I had an obligation to fetch water. Mom had told us in the afternoon that we needed to do it, but with Dad's absence, we didn't pay much attention. The afternoon passed playing, and only when it began to get dark did we realize we hadn't done our task. Our mother, always diligent, had reminded us several times about the importance of fetching the water before nightfall. However, Dad's absence made us feel like we could relax a bit. John and I took the opportunity to play by the river and climb the nearby trees, completely losing track of time. When the sun began to set and the temperature dropped, we realized we had made a serious mistake. The idea of facing Dad's anger became more real and terrifying. Dad arrived home, and upon learning of our disobedience, his anger was palpable. He ordered us to go fetch the water immediately. I felt a knot in my stomach. The thought of walking for half an hour in the dark terrified me. We didn't have electricity on the farm, and our only light source was an oil lantern. My brother and I began to prepare the donkey and the jugs for water, knowing we had no choice. The disapproval in Dad's eyes was enough to know we couldn't argue. His severe tone left no room for excuses or delays. While we prepared the donkey, we tried to convince Mom that we could go in the morning, but her firm look made it clear that Dad's decision was final. John tried to show bravery, although I could see his nervousness. We walked to the edge of the hill, where our descent to the river began. Only the occasional sounds of nocturnal animals broke the silence of the night as darkness closed in on us. With the lantern in one hand and the donkey led by John, we set off, fear growing with each step. From the moment we began our descent towards the river, a sense of imminent danger enveloped us. The path was narrow, and the trees' shadows stretched menacingly under the faint light of the lantern. John and I walked in silence. Every rustle of leaves under our feet seemed to echo in the darkness. We tried not to think about our grandparents' stories, but it was impossible to forget the warnings about the spirits haunting the forest. Every step we took brought us closer to the river, and with it, the feeling that we were not alone grew stronger. John tried to stay calm, but I could sense his quickened breath. "Don't worry, brother. We're almost there," he said, trying to reassure me, although we both knew the real challenge would be the way back. The darkness seemed thicker than ever, and every shadow made our hearts race. We comforted ourselves with the thought that once we filled the jugs, we could quickly return to the farm and end our nighttime adventure. Finally, we reached the river and began filling the jugs with water. While John worked, I held the lantern and looked around, alert to any movement. The sound of flowing water and the whispers of wind in the trees were the only noises breaking the silence. However, an unsettling feeling pervaded the air, as if someone was watching us. I tried to focus on the task, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was stalking us in the darkness. Just when we thought the worst was over, a loud noise broke the night's tranquility. A snap of branches made us turn sharply. The lantern trembled in my hands, and I almost dropped it. John looked at me with eyes full of fear and determination. "We need to leave now," he exclaimed desperately. Without wasting any more time, we picked up the filled jugs and started back to the farm. The return was even more terrifying than the journey there, with every shadow and sound feeding our panic. The fear of facing Dad's anger quickly faded in the face of the primal fear we felt at that moment. The return to the farm was going to be even more challenging than the way there, and we knew that well. John and I hurried to prepare the donkey with the jugs full of water, our hands shaking with fear and haste. The night had grown colder, and the sound of the river mingled with the forest's nocturnal noises. I tried to relight the lantern, but the flame was weak and flickering, casting trembling shadows around us. John tried to appear brave, but I could see the nervousness in his eyes. "We have to be quick, Michael," he said, as he secured the jugs to the donkey. We knew every minute we spent there made us more vulnerable. My mind was filled with images of the spirits and creatures from our grandparents' stories. I felt a knot in my stomach and a shiver down my spine. The darkness seemed denser, and the return path stretched out before us like a grim challenge. We began our ascent back to the farm, with John leading the way and me guiding the donkey. The lantern's light barely illuminated a few steps ahead, and the shadows seemed to move around us. The silence was almost total, interrupted only by the sound of our footsteps and the occasional braying of the donkey. Every snap of a branch or whisper of the wind made us stop and listen, our hearts pounding in our chests. The sense of surveillance grew stronger as we moved forward. John and I exchanged quick glances, knowing we both felt the same way. The hasty preparations for the night had been quick, but the persistent fear slowed our movements. The path we knew so well during the day now felt like a maze of shadows and invisible threats. We just wanted to reach the farm and feel safe in the light and warmth of home. With the jugs full of water, John and I prepared for the journey back to the farm. The darkness was oppressive, and the fear we had felt on the way there only intensified. As we adjusted the jugs on the donkey, John and I exchanged nervous glances. "We need to find the quickest way back," John said, his voice trembling but determined. We both knew that every minute spent in the forest exposed us to the unknown, to the shadows and whispers that seemed to follow us. We started walking at a brisk pace, but every noise from the forest made us stop and look around in fear. John tried to stay calm, but the fear was palpable in the air. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" I whispered, trying not to let panic take over. John nodded, though I could see the doubt in his eyes. "Just follow the path, Michael. Let's not stray," he replied, trying to sound convincing. We knew that losing the trail could be disastrous in that darkness. The tension between us grew with every step. The trees seemed to be closing in on us, and the shadows danced to the flickering lantern's rhythm. Every snap of a branch and every whisper of the wind made us jump and grit our teeth. John and I whispered about the best way to move forward, trying to remember the landmarks we had seen during the day. The urgency to reach the farm mingled with fear, and despite our efforts to maintain composure, the sense of surveillance persisted. We forced ourselves to keep moving, guided by the hope that the farm would soon appear before us, like a beacon of safety in the darkness. As we progressed along the path, the sensation of surveillance grew increasingly intense. Suddenly, a loud crack to our right made us stop dead in our tracks. John raised the lantern, trying to illuminate what had made the noise, but the flickering light barely penetrated the darkness. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice filled with panic. I didn't respond, but my heart was pounding. In the distance, we could make out a dark figure moving between the trees, barely visible among the shadows. The figure stopped and seemed to watch us from the darkness. John and I were paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do. Suddenly, the figure began to move slowly towards us. Each step it took seemed to echo in the night's silence, amplifying our terror. John tried to back away, but tripped and almost dropped the lantern. "We have to go now," he exclaimed desperately. My survival instinct kicked in, and without thinking twice, I grabbed John and we started running, trying to get away from that entity as quickly as possible. As we ran, we could hear heavy footsteps behind us, as if a figure were following us. The shadows of the trees stretched and twisted menacingly, as if they wanted to catch us. Fear and adrenaline drove us forward, even though the path was difficult to see. Every now and then, John would lift the lantern to try to light the way, but the weak light only served to increase our sense of hopelessness. Finally, we reached a clearing where we could stop to catch our breath. We looked back, expecting to see the figure emerging from the shadows, but there was nothing. However, a sense of imminent danger charged the air. "What was that?" I inquired, trying to calm my breathing. John shook his head, unable to answer. We both knew we couldn't stay there. Without saying another word, we set off again, hoping that the farm was close and that we could escape that nightmare. Just when we thought the worst was over, we heard a sound that chilled us to the bone, the slow, deliberate clopping of hooves approaching along the path. John and I stood frozen, trying to locate the source of the noise. Out of the shadows emerged a rider on a large black horse, both shrouded in a darkness that seemed to absorb the light of our lantern. A hood concealed the rider's face, while his long cloak billowed in the wind. The horse moved with slow, deliberate steps, and the rider seemed to watch us from beneath his hood. John and I backed away, trying to distance ourselves from this apparition, but the rider followed us with an unsettling calm. With each step the horse took, it seemed larger and more terrifying. I tried to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. John, his voice trembling, shouted, "Who are you? What do you want?" But there was no response, only the sound of hooves striking the ground and the crunching of leaves under the horse's weight. The rider stopped a few meters from us, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by our ragged breathing. Then, the rider raised a hand and pointed towards the river, as if indicating something to us. The lantern's light flickered and almost went out, leaving us in an even more terrifying twilight. John and I exchanged panicked glances, unsure of what to do. Finally, we decided to follow the direction the rider was pointing, hoping it would lead us away from him. With each step we took, the rider remained motionless, watching us. When we finally moved far enough away, the sound of hooves began again, but this time moving away. We turned to look and saw the rider's figure fading into the forest shadows as if he had never been there. Fear drove us to move faster, And although the path was treacherous, the urgency to escape gave us strength. We knew we had to reach the farm as soon as possible before something worse caught up with us. The way back to the farm seemed endless. John and I moved as fast as our tired legs and laden donkey allowed. Every shadow in the forest seemed to stretch and twist menacingly, and the nocturnal sounds that were once familiar now seemed sinister. The feeling of being watched never left us, and every crack of branches or whisper of the wind made us quicken our pace, driven by fear. As we approached the hill leading to the farm, the darkness seemed to thicken. John and I exchanged nervous glances, trying to encourage each other. "We're almost there," John would say, though his trembling voice betrayed his own fear. I nodded, gripping the donkey's lead tightly and silently praying we would arrive safely. Exhaustion mixed with terror, making each step heavier. Upon reaching the hillside, the steep and slippery slope became a new challenge. The lantern's weak light barely illuminated the path, and the donkey began to show signs of fatigue. John and I took turns holding the lantern and guiding the donkey, trying to stay focused on the task. However, the sense of imminent danger persisted, and every time we looked back, we expected to see the rider or something worse emerging from the shadows. Finally, after what seemed like hours of walking, we saw the farm's lights in the distance. Relief was immediate, but we didn't slow down until we were within the safety perimeter of our home. As we arrived at the door, Dad was waiting with a mix of worry and anger on his face. He helped us unload the jugs and asked why it had taken so long. As we struggled to comprehend our safe return, the story of our encounter with the rider clung to our throats. Seeing our pale faces and trembling bodies, Dad knew something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, trying to sound firm but with a latent worry. John and I looked at each other, trying to find the words to describe what we had seen and felt. "There was someone in the woods. A rider," I began, but my voice broke. Dad frowned, clearly confused and concerned by our apparent lack of coherence. John took a deep breath and tried to explain better. "Dad, we saw a man on a black horse. On the way back, he followed us. We don't know who he was, but he didn't seem real," he said, his voice trembling. Dad observed us carefully, evaluating our words and expressions. He knew we weren't lying, but the story sounded unbelievable even to us. "Are you sure about what you saw?" he asked, looking for any sign of exaggeration or error. "Yes, Dad. We were scared, but we know what we saw," I insisted, trying to sound convincing. Dad was silent for a moment, clearly thinking about what to do. Finally, he nodded and led us inside the farm. "You're safe now. Tomorrow we'll go and check the area," he said, trying to calm us. His firm presence and promise to investigate gave us some peace, although the fear lingered in our minds. That night, as we attempted to sleep, the rider's images and the sensation of surveillance continued to haunt us. Every sound on the farm made us jump, and our dreams were filled with shadows and whispers. Dad stayed up late, watching and ensuring everything was in order. His concern for us and his determination to protect us gave us a sense of security, although we knew that the questions about what had really happened that night remained unanswered. The next morning, the daylight did little to dispel the fear from the previous night. John and I woke up early, but the memory of the rider was still fresh in our minds. While we had breakfast, Dad called us to talk about what had happened. "I want you to tell me everything again, calmly," he said, and we began to recount our experience in more detail. Every time we mentioned the rider, the atmosphere in the kitchen grew tenser. Dad listened attentively without interrupting. When we finished, he stayed thoughtful for a moment. "I don't think you imagine this, but we need to be cautious," he finally said. His acceptance of our story relieved us a bit, but it also worried us. "I'll go check the path to the river to see if I find anything," he added, and he asked us not to stray far from the farm until he knew more. Although we were scared, The idea of Dad taking action gave us a sense of security. During the day, we tried to continue with our usual tasks, but the fear remained. John and I talked in low voices about what we had seen, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was just someone from town trying to scare us, I suggested, but even I didn't believe that explanation. The stories from our grandparents about spirits and apparitions felt too real now, and we couldn't ignore what we had experienced. That afternoon, Dad returned from the river without any news. I didn't find anything unusual, but that doesn't mean there isn't something, he said seriously. His lack of findings only increased the mystery. That day affected our farm's sense of safety, making us all more aware of our surroundings. Dad reminded us of our grandparents' stories and taught us some prayers and rituals for protection, assuring us that faith and caution would keep us safe. Our mother, always practical and with a deep spiritual sense, decided to handle the matter differently. There are things in this world that we can't fully understand, but we can protect ourselves, she said as she gathered us all around the table. She pulled out an old book of prayers and amulets that she had inherited from her mother and taught us some practices we should follow to keep spirits and bad energies at bay. Every night before going to bed, Mom made us recite a special protection prayer. She placed amulets at the farm's entrance and gave us small medals that we had to carry with us at all times. These symbols will protect us, she said with conviction. Although at first we felt a bit skeptical, we gradually began to feel a certain tranquility in following these rituals. It was as if we were taking concrete steps to protect ourselves from the unknown. In addition to the prayers, Mom also taught us to be more aware of our surroundings. Always pay attention to what you feel and what's around you, she advised. She explained that many times, animals can sense presences that we can't see. She asked us to observe our dogs and livestock's behavior and not ignore their warning signs. These teachings made us feel more prepared and less defenseless against what might be lurking. Over time, Mom's protective measures and Dad's constant vigilance began to pay off. Although the fear never completely disappeared, we learned to live with it and stay alert. The ghost stories that once seemed like just tales now became part of our daily reality, but with our parents' lessons, we felt stronger and more capable of facing the unknown. The farm returned to being a place of hard work and family unity, but always with one eye on the shadows, reminding us that we were not alone in this world. Despite all of our parents' protective measures and teachings, the experience of that night never completely left us. As time passed, we reverted to our daily routine on the farm, yet the enduring memory of the enigmatic rider and the sense of surveillance in the darkness persisted. Dad continued to be vigilant, and Mom reinforced our prayers and protection rituals, teaching us to live with a renewed respect for the unknown. Years passed, and we all grew up, but that night left an indelible mark on our lives. Even now, at 42 years old, the image of the rider and the cold sensation on my back remain in my dreams. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, when the wind whispers through the trees, I can feel the same fear I felt as a child, and I remember my grandmother's words about the spirits watching the forest. These experiences have taught me to value family protection and the importance of always being alert. My brothers and I still share stories of that night, remembering the details with unsettling clarity. Although we try to give them a logical explanation, we know there are things that escape our understanding. The memory of that night on the farm has become part of our family history, a warning that the unexplainable can always be closer than we think. To this day, the shadows and whispers of the forest continue to remind us that the past never truly disappears. And although fear can be a constant companion, so are the strengths and lessons we learned. The night we faced the mysterious rider is a story we continue to tell, not just as a warning, but as a lesson in courage and family unity in the face of the unknown. I really hope you liked this tale. I am thrilled to share these stories with you. Kindly provide your thoughts and experiences in the comments section. It will aid in my further development. If you like the video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Many thanks, and I hope to see you again soon.